Recess at any time. Also, without objection, the meeting record will remain open for 5 legislative days, so members may submit any materials they wish to be included therein. Thank you, Ranking Member Torres, members of the subcommittee, and our witness, Mr. Ron Russo, for joining us for today's oversight hearing. The United States Capitol Police Office of Inspector General is responsible for evaluating the efficiency and the effectiveness of the U.S. Capitol Police's programs and operations. This includes supervising and conducting audits, inspections, and investigations to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. The OIG is responsible for both making recommendations to the Capitol Police Board and also ensuring that those recommendations are completed. On January 6, 2021, the U.S. Capitol experienced one of the biggest security failures in this institution's history. Following the attack on the Capitol, the OIG published 6 flash reports. In those flash reports, the OIG detailed specific failures related to operations, intelligence, training, and other specialized units. To correct these failures, the OIG made specific recommendations to the Capitol Police. During today's hearing, we'll review those findings and evaluate the department's completion of the recommendations made in those flash reports. Since being hired, Mr. Russo has closed numerous previous Inspector General recommendations. I look forward to learning more about specifically what actions Capitol Police implemented. Given that Mr. Russo is new to the role, today's hearing is also an opportunity to ensure that the OIG is fulfilling its purpose to provide independent and relevant analysis of the department. An independent Inspector General is essential to ensuring transparency. We've made progress to increase transparency by finally taking steps to publicly publish OIG reports, which is consistent with other federal inspectors general. However, to date, there are only 2 available on the OIG's website. Finally, since announcing today's hearing, numerous whistleblowers have come forward with claims of retaliation and abuse after speaking with the Office of Inspector General. While we have concerns about the conduct of both the Inspector General and the Inspector General's office and the department on these matters, the committee does not believe it is in a position yet to publicly address these allegations. While we review these allegations, we take all whistleblower reports seriously and appreciate their willingness to come forward. Before Mr. Russo was hired as Inspector General, there were serious allegations of retaliation within the Capitol Police against whistleblowers who had spoken confidentially to a previous U.S. Capitol Police Inspector General. And let me be clear, any retaliation is unacceptable. I think I speak for both Democrats and Republicans when I say this committee will aggressively protect whistleblowers from any internal retaliation. Ensuring the U.S. Capitol Police is best positioned to defend against threats to the Capitol, including all the members, staff, and visitors, is a priority for this subcommittee. To accomplish this, Congress must continue to exercise our oversight responsibilities. I now recognize Ranking Member Ms. Torres for 5 minutes for the purpose of providing an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Russo. I also want to thank you for meeting with me earlier this week to discuss some of my concerns about security at the Capitol, and I look forward to working with you in conducting oversight of the United States Capitol Police. Oversight of the police, including the Office of Inspector General, should be a bipartisan issue. And while my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and I disagree on some issues, I am hopeful that we can approach oversight of the Office of Inspector General with a seriousness and bipartisanship that it deserves. The U.S. Capitol Police Office of Inspector General is one of the most essential offices in the entire legislative branch. The Inspector General's audits, investigations, and other oversight activities related to Capitol Police operations are vital to the committee, the Congress, and as a result, our nation. Tragically, on January 6, 2021, we saw firsthand the importance of the Inspector General's work in making recommendations to the department and ensuring that those recommendations are implemented. Last Congress, on the morning of January 7, 2021, then chair of this committee, Zoe Lofgren, asked the prior Capitol Police Inspector General to drop all of their pending work and evaluate the department's preparation for the January 6th attack on the Capitol. This resulted in a series of 7 flash reports and corresponding series of hearings. The Inspector General spent nearly 7 hours in front of this committee explaining his findings and answering tough questions. Today, I'm particularly interested in implementation and the status of those recommendations. And as I mentioned to you when we met privately, I spent 17 and a half years as a 911 dispatcher with the LAPD. I was also in the House Gallery when the Capitol was breached on January 6th. Needless to say, I take my security and the security of the people that visit here and that work here very seriously. Inspector General Russo and his team are subject matter experts. You know, you are a vital partner to the committee as we conduct our oversight. And I am eager to hear Inspector General Russo's assessment of the current state of the department. What steps has the department taken to improve its intelligence sharing capabilities with both partner agencies and internally? What are the offices at the top of the department's organizational chart doing to ensure the rank and file officers are appropriately read into relevant intelligence assessments? And has officer morale improved? How has the department changed the way it trains both new recruits and veteran officers? And will the department be ready if and when an event like the January 6th attack happens again? These are just a few of the questions that I hope to have answered today, in addition to the committee prepared for today's proceedings. It heard from several individuals expressing concerns about the operations of the Inspector General's office. I hope that any one of our federal employees who has experienced workplace misconduct can feel comfortable coming forward and has the appropriate tools and resources to do so. I look forward to continuing conversations with the Inspector General to ensure that the office is held to its highest possible standard. And while this is not the forum to address those concerns, I do expect the committee to do so thoroughly. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you again, Mr. Russo, for being here with us today, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. Thank you, Ms. Torres. Without objection, all other members' opening statements will be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Pursuant to paragraph B, Committee Rule 6, the witness will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative and may be seated. I'll now introduce our witness, Mr. Ron Russo. The United States Capitol Police Board hired Mr. Russo to be the United States Capitol Police Inspector General on January 29, 2023. As the United States Capitol Police Inspector General, Mr. Russo reports directly to the Capitol Police Board and leads the Office of Inspector General, where he supervises and conducts audits, inspections, investigations involving U.S. Capitol Police programs, functions, systems, and operations. We appreciate Mr. Russo being here with us today and look forward to your testimony. As a reminder, we have read your written statement and it will appear in the full hearing record. Under Committee Rule 9, you are to limit your oral presentation to a brief summary of your written statement, unless I extend this time period in consultation with Ranking Member Torres. Please remember to press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes have expired, and you don't have to stop at that moment, but we'd ask that you do wrap up your statements at that time. And Mr. Russo, I now recognize you for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon. My name is Ron Russo, and I was appointed Inspector General of the United States Capitol Police in January of 2023. I thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today, discuss the status of recommendations made by the Office of Inspector General concerning the events of January 6, 2021. In accordance with our statutory authority, the Office of Inspector General began a review of the operations and programs in place prior to and during the events of January 6th. Our objectives were to determine if the Department established adequate measures for ensuring the safety and security of members of Congress, their staff, and the Capitol complex. Over a 10-month period ending October 2021, our reviews resulted in 7 specific flash reports containing 103 recommendations. The areas reviewed included operational planning and intelligence, resulting in 8 recommendations, the Civil Disturbance Unit and Intelligence, 26 recommendations, Counter-Surveillance and Threat Assessment, 10 recommendations, the Containment Emergency Response Team and First Responders Unit, 21 recommendations, Command and Coordination Bureau, resulting in 12 recommendations, Hazardous Incident Response Division and K-9 Unit, 15 recommendations, and finally the Dignitary Protection Division and Human Capital, resulting in 11 recommendations. Overall, of the 103 recommendations, the Department has remediated 86%, closing 89 of the 103, and is actively working towards closing the remaining 14 recommendations. The remaining open recommendations include 9 related to updating or creating policy and procedure, 2 concerning reorganizing units, 2 regarding compliance with existing policies, and 1 related to training. In addition to our oversight efforts concerning the events of January 6, our office has also conducted several other department reviews aimed at enhancing operations in areas such as policy and procedure, the USCP field offices, the career progression and rotation, the MP7 rifle program, Training Service Bureau, and the processes of the Intelligence and Interagency Coordination Division. Since my appointment, I've also worked closely with the Capitol Police Board and the Department to increase transparency by providing public access to Inspector General reports for the first time ever. We recently published 2 reports, with several under review pending release. Finally, I'd like to commend the dedicated officers of the USCP for their tireless efforts to protect the U.S. Capitol building, members of Congress, and visitors. I'd also like to recognize the Capitol Police Board and the congressional committees for their oversight and leadership. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. I now recognize Mr. Murphy for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Russo, for coming today. Appreciate your service to our nation. I'm just going to run through a few questions if I can. As my understanding, I'm not a bureaucrat. I've just been in Congress for a few years. Inspector Generals are tasked with conducting oversight, providing reports to Congress. Your work should include audits, evaluations, and investigations. The aim is to ensure transparency and to boost accountability to Congress and accountability to the American people. These reports give us the requisite information to better inform Congress and the American people and make changes to rules and laws. But to do this, however, the Inspector General must be truly independent of the department, independent of the agency that it is overseeing, so that a fair, balanced analysis can be provided. I'd like to ask a series of questions regarding your independence, your relationship with the Capitol Police, as well as its board. First of all, can you tell me what role do you play in the hiring decisions for personnel broadly at the U.S. Capitol Police?
As far as hiring decisions within the U.S. Capitol Police,
Correct.
Nothing.
Correct.
I'm not involved with that.
Not at all.
No,
All
sir.
right. Thank you. Recently, the U.S. Capitol Police hired a new Chief Administrative Officer. What role did you play, if any, in that hiring?
In that instance, I was asked to participate in the initial review team that looked over the first level of applicants for the sole purpose of determining if their background and accomplishments demonstrated the same as the position description for that position.
All right, so just screening, essentially.
That's all it was, the top screen.
All right. At the Capitol Police, the CAO oversees a number of offices related to financial management, human resources, IT, as well as other functions. Can you describe what relationship you have with the CAO?
Only from the standpoint of that position being over the administrative functions of the agency, and we would interface as it relates to our audit work that might affect those areas, as you mentioned, finance, HR, the various administrative support functions for the police department.
Okay. During the hiring in the new CAO, who asked you to review the resumes when you did that?
The chief of staff for the department.
Okay. What other ways did you participate in the hiring of the process of the new CAO?
That was the extent of it. After the
Did you
first
speak
scrub,
with the
there-
candidate or anything like that? Or
No,
just
sir.
Just review the
just the original, and there was, well, I didn't sit on a board, I didn't,
you just made a recommendation that the process could move forward. Is that correct or not?
we ended up with, I think it was 5 candidates that met the position description and passed that on. Beyond that, I wasn't involved.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Lastly, just about the hiring of the new CAO, do you believe it's appropriate for the IG to participate in the process that you're stating, given the nature of your role and the oversight that you should be provided?
So I was careful to only be involved at the very top level. I certainly didn't rank or promote any one individual for that position.
So how did it move forward from when you reviewed things? How did you
So there was-
sign off on that?
Yes, sir. There was 3 members doing the first review, and we took a group of names, identified who matched the position description, and those, as far as I know from there, the names were pushed up to the chief or to another hiring board. I'm not sure the details
That
on
was
what
your
went on.
extent of it?
That was my extent of it, yes, sir.
Okay. All right, just changing gears just a little bit. How often do you meet with the U.S. Capitol Police Board?
So monthly or as needed if things come up, but I would say on average monthly, and there may have been 1 or 2 off meetings based on issues that come
Are
up.
these oversight meetings? What are they? What kind of meetings are they?
So the monthly meeting is a standard meeting that the board has. Every quarter, I provide a presentation.
Is the police chief there?
Generally, he is, yes.
Okay, all right. Just a couple other questions. Do you have a legal counsel on your staff?
I do,
You do.
yes, sir,
All right. Do you meet with them how often?
as needed.
On an ad hoc basis. Okay, last question in mind. How often do you speak with the Capitol Police Council Office?
Not often.
Anybody can you describe that just a little bit, or?
If there's an HR issue, I've talked to them. You know, if there's a emerging issue within the department, there may be some communication for familiarity purposes, but that's about
Only
it,
on an incident-specific basis.
I would say.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for appearing. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Torres, for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Inspector General Russo, in May of this year, Capitol Police Chief Manager testified that, and you testified here today, that of the 103 recommendations related to January 6, 89 have been closed, correct?
That is correct.
So since the chief testified, it's been 2 months before this committee, why haven't any other recommendations been closed? And do you have an expectation as to how long it will take to close out the remaining 14 recommendations that you made?
I really don't. The department works fairly independent in working through those recommendations. I am familiar that they have a recommendation review committee, that they have an internal process to evaluate the recommendations and put in place measures to correct.
Is there a time frame that you have given them to close out the remaining 14?
No, ma'am.
Of the open recommendations that they still have, the department must seek approval from the Capitol Police Board and its congressional oversight committees to elevate and recognize its intelligence resources into a bureau-level entity. You and I talked about my visits with both the Los Angeles Police Department and the New York Police Department to get feedback from them as to their assessments during civil unrests or major demonstrations. I heard from them, from both of those departments and others that I talked to, that communication from the top down is critical. My concern here lies with those who are making decisions at the very top. How is information trickling down to rank and file officers, and how intelligence is being shared among entities? I'm also concerned how Capitol Police officers are trained to effectively use their equipment and able to adequately gather and share intelligence within a centralized, interconnected network. I understand that the department has submitted a proposed reorganization plan to the Capitol Police Board and the committee. How, if at all, does that proposed organization plan address your recommendation?
So several of our recommendations dealt with the training issue you're talking about. How do we collect, how do we discern the intelligence, make it workable, get it to all members of the agency? The other portion is centralizing. Whenever you centralize that functionality, it helps to prevent miscommunication, ensure that intelligence doesn't fall through the cracks. So one of our recommendation, of course, was to elevate the intelligence unit to a bureau level, as you had mentioned. So since our flash reports came out, much additional training has gone on. Strengthening of the communication, as you said, from the top down, from our vantage point, has been put in place, and I think they're in a much better place now to both collect, share with our stakeholders, even outside the agency, to deal with those intelligence issues.
So if we don't have proper communication now as a division, and your proposal is to elevate it to a bureau, and that doesn't seem to be happening. And I hear the K-9 unit is not receiving their 16 monthly hours of training. We need to expedite the recommendation to make sure that if the division isn't working and we're going to move it into the bureau, that the bureaucrats, as my colleague stated, move in that direction. Do you have any idea, any feedback on when that will happen?
I don't know when it'll happen. I know they're working on it, and I think the main issue with elevating that to the Bureau is to centralize that chain of command and that communication instead of having the disparate intel capacity in each unit, centralizing that. And as far as the K-9, yes, 16 hours of training. We suggested that they change the training, the 10-hour shifts to 10, or whatever way they could do it to ensure that training occurs.
My time has expired, but I will follow up with your office on this very important issue.
Thank
I
you,
yield
ma'am.
back.
The gentlelady yields. It is the chair's intention with consultation, agreement with the minority, that we may go a second round of questions to be able to follow up. And I've spoken to Mr. Russo about that as well. At this point, I recognize Mr. Griffith for 5 minutes for the purpose of questioning the witness.
Mr. Russo, let me apologize first that I wasn't here earlier and that I won't be here later, but I've got a markup going on in another committee across in another building. So, can the U.S. Capitol Police Office of Professional Responsibility, the OPR, investigate assistant chiefs of police, yes or no?
We generally handle anybody, so no, I mean, they could if for some reason we referred it to them, but generally we have essentially an MOU where we would handle management positions.
All right. In practice, how does your office handle issues that would otherwise be handled by the Office of Professional Responsibility?
So when I got there, I put in place a referral system, so we have that 360 tracking. We work in court. They're a dotted line to my office.
So, prior to that, do you know what the policy was?
I'm not positive.
Okay, that's fair, and I may follow up with some written questions afterwards. Sure. Are you familiar with the separation agreement that former Assistant Chief Pittman entered into with the United States Capitol Police when she went on leave without pay for 6 months in order to be able or to be eligible to receive her department retirement?
I have some understanding of it, yes, sir.
All right. And are you aware that the United States Capitol Police Board has a requirement to have a formal or standard leave policy in effect?
Yes, sir.
And leave policies for the department stipulate that an officer to be eligible to receive leave without pay must indeed have an expectation of returning to full-time duty. However, former Assistant Chief Pittman had accepted a job located across the country at the time she was placed on leave without pay. Have you opened an investigation or have you looked into this matter?
We did a cursory review of the matter.
And did you come up with a conclusion? Or do you need to do more investigation?
And we certainly can. If I could, we received information that she was actually still getting a paycheck. The information that came to us was still on payroll, getting a paycheck. We looked into that. That was not the case. In the course of our cursory review, we did determine that she was on leave without pay from February 1st until June, I feel like it was 17th, that she had also entered into a separation agreement with the department. We looked at the relevant policies and compared them actually with OPM, which doesn't have the likelihood of returning portion, but ours does. But it also stipulates that the chief has the authority to alter those. I conversed with my legal counsel in the office, and we came to the conclusion at this point in our cursory review that they entered into a legal agreement, that it became a legal matter at that point, and because the chief had the authority based on the policy changes, that's where we ended up. If it's a desire for us to look deeper, we can do that.
All right, I would express that desire on the record right now. Now, that being said, so here becomes the question. If the chief has changed the policy, does that mean any rank and file officer, whether they be an assistant or, relatively low-ranking person, could get 5 to 6 months of time off after taking another job without any real expectation of coming back? And let me be clear. I'm not talking about a situation where somebody has a disability and maybe, people are hopeful they'll be able to come back, but they may not be able to come back and they're within 6 months of being able to retire. That's a different animal. I understand that one, but taking a job all the way across the country, I'm having a hard time understanding how this is not some form of abuse of the system and maybe even a fraud, not by the chief of police, but by others on the United States government and its system. And my time is out. But can you look into that for me, please? I'm very concerned about it.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. D'Esposito for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And Mr. Russo, thank you for being here today. I also want to thank you for your service to keeping people safe and law enforcement. I, too, spent a career in the NYPD, so thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you.
Are you aware of the law that governs the IG's non-disclosure of the identity of an employee or member who has come forward with a complaint or information of potential Capitol Police misconduct?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay, so I'm just going to read it for the record. So U.S. Code 2 U.S.C. 1909, sub 3, sub B, the Inspector General shall not, after receipt of a complaint or information from an employee or member, disclose the identity of the employee or member without the consent of the employee or member, unless required by law, or the Inspector General determines such disclosure is otherwise unavoidable during the course of the investigation. So, I think I know the answers to these questions, but I'm going to ask them for the record. Do you agree that this is important to protect rank-and-file officers and employees from receiving retribution from coming forward with potential misconduct?
It's of paramount importance.
Okay. Do you interpret this section as only protecting specific individuals who specifically ask for whistleblower protections, or does it apply to anyone, the rank and file, the men and women of the Capitol Police, that come forward with a complaint or information regarding potential misconduct and speaks to the OIG or someone from your office?
It applies to all.
Okay. As Inspector General, have you ever disclosed, and I know you've only been here since January 29th, and we thank you for that, but during your time as an Inspector General here or in previous capacities, have you ever disclosed the name of an employee or member who had come forward with a complaint or any information?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. Would you ever disclose this information without the individual's permission?
We would protect that information at all costs. It's super serious that people feel comfortable to come to us without fear of retaliation. So it's a priority to make sure we handle that with great care.
Thank you. Do you know of any prior IGs disclosing the names of Capitol Police employees who spoke to the OIG and made complaints about USCP leadership?
I don't.
Okay. We've heard from multiple individuals in different hearings that have spoken to this committee alleging that the previous OIG received whistleblower information about intelligence failures on January 6th under former Acting Chief Pittman. Subsequently, the individuals were placed on a performance improvement plan and eventually forced out of the department. Do you, as the OIG and in your previous capacities, do you consider this retaliation?
I'm not familiar with the situation or the details, so it's hard for me to make a judgment. I would submit to the committee that it's one of the most important things we do to be able to protect these complainants, and that any disclosure of that information is inappropriate. You want to protect them from retaliation. And so, again, I can't speak to the specifics of that issue, but I can assure this committee that's a top priority for us.
Well, thank you. I know I agree. And those allegations that I referenced, and I'm not sure if this has happened since January 29th, but have any of these allegations of retaliation been investigated by the OIG?
I believe we have had some investigations related to that. It might have been prior to January, but I can certainly look into that.
Yeah, so I guess the question I really have is, are you committed to conducting full investigation and providing a report to this committee of your findings?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I just have about a minute left. Are there any practices in place in your office that would ensure that this statutory prohibition on disclosing a whistleblower's information is enforced?
The general principles of the Whistleblower Act would be the governing principle for us to ensure we keep that confidential, that information.
And what, if any, do you think the disciplinary action should be against an IG who fails to comply with this section of the statute?
So in Florida, I think we put in a civil penalty. It's a very serious issue. I'm not sure what the penalty is here. Certainly a violation of our administrative policies that would have to be dealt with in that arena.
And I know I'm just a second over time, but I think this is an important question. In your opinion, should the United States Capitol Police adopt specific policy to protect whistleblowers?
Yes, if they don't have a particular policy right now that speaks to that specifically, there should be.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
My time has expired. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for purpose of questioning our witness. Mr. Russo, thank you for your forthrightness in the questions so far, especially with Mr. D'Esposito. I just want to quickly follow up on his line of questioning, because our goal in this committee is to work together to make sure, as the ranking member alluded to, that the horrors of January 6th do not happen again. That's the ultimate goal of what we're trying to get to, and I think you would agree with that. To do that, though, we need to be able to get questions answered. We need to work with you and with the Capitol Police to make sure that we do get the information that we need to work with. And I asked these questions of the Chief of Police, and he agreed to this. And so the first question for the record is, will you commit to make all members of your staff available for questioning by the committee?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And the second question, will you commit to this committee that you or anyone on your staff will not take retaliatory action against any officer or employee of the United States Capitol Police and any employee of the Office of Inspector General?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for that, and that's what we expected, and look forward to working with you and your staff as we proceed down this path. Your predecessor, Michael Bolton, conducted a sweeping review of the Capitol Police following January 6th that many observers view as let's say, a roadmap for improving Capitol Police. Have you re-examined Mr. Bolton's recommendations since you've been in this post?
I have.
What was your assessment?
I think they touched on all the important areas. You know, when you talk about the lack of command and control, the communication issues, the stifled intelligence gathering and coordination with outside agencies, and then you add in the equipment failures and lack of training, you know, all were contributing factors to the issues of January 6th. And I think the recommendations, 103 of them that focused specifically in those areas, really moved the ball downfield. I think they're wholeheartedly trying to implement these changes and trying to raise the bar.
When you first started as the Capitol Police Inspector General, how many outstanding recommendations from post-January 6, the post-January 6 flash report series remained outstanding?
You know, I'm not sure of the exact number. I think that there was, we've closed somewhere maybe just south of 20 since I've gotten here.
So, but how many were open when you came in?
So maybe 30-something. I can
Okay.
get back to you with a
my
more exact.
recollection is maybe 37. I think you said out of 103, but if you could check on that,
Yes,
we'd
sir.
appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
And did you say 14 are outstanding as of today?
Yes, sir.
Okay. After going through a long period of time without much movement on these recommendations, it appears that recommendations were closed out more quickly after you arrived. Is this because you're really putting an effort into it, or do you have an explanation for the sudden rush to close out recommendations?
I don't. I think that we looked over some of these findings. We worked with the department. They would have questions about how closely they were to the finish line on some of them. And frankly, there were some of them that we could apply compensating controls. They were moving in the right direction. They met the spirit of the recommendation. And we're certainly going to follow up and evaluate the thoroughness of their work. But I think we were able to get a few closed through that.
Briefly explain. So Capitol Police, they say that they've met a recommendation. How do you evaluate whether it's actually been completed or not?
So they do furnish us information. Let's say it's a policy enhancement. They actually have to provide us that policy. In some case, they show evidence that it was disseminated to the rank and file. Whatever we need to feel comfortable that the remedy is in place.
Okay. Something you said just a moment ago just raises a red flag. You used the term "in the spirit of." Would you, that rings to me as maybe it's not totally done, or maybe it was done not exactly as the recommendation said, but it was in the spirit of it. Would you ever close a recommendation because the Capitol Police indicated they were taking steps in the spirit of the recommendation, even though they haven't totally completed it or completed it as was recommended?
So it's possible they didn't fulfill the letter of the recommendation, and yet we felt comfortable enough that the risk no longer existed, and it could be closed.
So I guess my question then would lead into if there was recommendations that were there that you evaluated from Mr. Bolton that you thought were the right things to do, but yet you closed them out in the spirit of it may not be exactly the way it is. Is that what I'm understanding? Is
Well,
they may not have been done exactly the way that it was recommended?
Well, and I'll give you an example. My predecessor closed one out after it was said every member of the agency needs a top secret clearance. After discussions with the department, they acquiesced and determined that as long as the department finds certain key positions that would require that and make it voluntary, they closed it out. So this can happen from time to time if the department can demonstrate to you that they're meeting that spirit, ultimately getting that security background and clearance with certain positions. Sometimes you can modify your approach and get that closed.
So this will be my last question this round. I'll save the others because I think this is important here. So you close out a recommendation, even though it isn't precisely what the recommendation is. I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
is that a fair way of saying, yes, we've actually met this recommendation? Or do you annotate that we've modified the recommendation and it's not exactly the way it was? And the illustration you gave, I can agree with that. Are there others that have been done in the spirit of that may not have actually been per the letter of the recommendation? That some closed out in the spirit of a recommendation?
Yeah, it's hard to come up with a, you know, I'm thinking of one that is more clerical, you know, where they had a batch of policies that were basically ready to go, but they had the wrong acronym for the division. The division name had since changed, and they ended up sending out a directive to the affected parties, making sure everybody knew with that one administrative issue, they need to follow up and clean up those policies, but in the short term, they're able to get the bigger part of that guidance out to the affected people. So, you know, I think there's a few ways to answer that question, Chairman,
Well,
but, you know, for the most part, that's why I say spirit of, we want to try to get the corrections in place.
Okay. Thank you, and I appreciate the ranking member. I was going to cut myself off because we're going over time, but as the rules say, in consultation, we gave you a little bit more time. I'm going to continue on with that line of questioning when we come back to round two. I have a little bit more at this point. I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Stile, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair Loudermilk. Appreciate you holding today's hearing on the oversight of the U.S. Capitol Police Office of Inspector General. As chairman, one of my priorities has been to depoliticize Capitol security. I think we've got to increase transparency and accountability within the Capitol Police, and it requires an independent Inspector General. And I've been concerned that the OIG lacks that independence necessary to properly do its job. And I know it's in part due to OIG's unique reporting structure. The U.S. Capitol Police Board selects and oversees the OIG. And as we continue to review potential reforms to the board, OIG independence must be part of that conversation. During today's hearing, we must also address how OIG is handling whistleblowers who come forward. There's been recent allegations made by whistleblowers against the current IG's leadership that are highly concerning. And I want to assure all those who are tuning into today's hearing that this committee takes all whistleblower allegations seriously, and we're committed to protecting you. Now, Mr. Russo, can I ask, I'm going to dive into a series of questions here. How many U.S. Capitol Police Office of Inspector General reports have been made public?
Right.
2, sir.
Out of how many?
I think that we have, you mean the universe of all reports? We've completed, since inception of the office, about 650 reports.
And 2 are made public?
Yes, sir.
And are you obligated to make those reports public?
No, sir.
No.
Previous to the newest direction to come up with a process to publicize them, there was actually a directive from the board, I feel like it was 2017, that instructed reports not to be published.
So in 2017, there's an instruction to not make them public. Now there's an instruction to make them public, but out of that, only 2 of a large number have been made public. What's the process for making a U.S. Capitol Police OIG report public?
So when I got here, we finalized that process, which includes our office, the IG office, looking over the reports to ensure security-sensitive information isn't disseminated. We then send it to the department for them to go through and ensure there was nothing, again, sensitive information. And then ultimately it goes to the board council, board staff to do their evaluation. After that's complete, it comes back to my office and it gets posted on the OIG website.
And after a report's completed, is it submitted to the Capitol Police Board? Is that the final destination of the report? Who do you submit the report to upon a report being completed?
Exactly. It goes to the police chief and his team for response. They have an opportunity in so many days to respond back to the recommendations in terms of discussion of corrective action plans. And then ultimately, shortly after that, we send it off to the board, and then we send it off to the committees.
And do you personally support making OIG reports public?
Yes, sir.
So you don't have a problem with the transparency that I think is important in contrast to what the 2017 rule was?
No, sir, in Florida, everything's open, so this is a completely different process up here.
Do you currently feel that you have the full authority to make reports public? Or does someone else control that decision?
The board makes the decision on a case-by-case basis.
So the board makes the decision as whether or not an OIG report becomes public, not you.
Correct.
So the fact that they're required to be made public by Congress, that's a decision-making process, you're saying, by the Capitol Police Board, not a decision-making process by you?
Correct.
And have you spoken to the Capitol Police Board about making OIG reports public?
Not outside of our process to make them public. My sense is that now we have fulfilled the guidance of the last Congress to get these reports publicized. We developed the process. Again, as you pointed out, we've put 2 online, and I think there's 6 or 7 in review now. I would anticipate those becoming public more rapidly.
And who do you have those conversations with to increase the speed at which those are becoming public?
Just through my staff who talk to the next, the contacts in the department, and then they converse with the contacts at the board. And I've seen some group email. I think now that we have all the folks around the table, so to speak, that need to be part of the review, it should be a little bit more rapid.
Okay, I'll come back and follow up on this in the second round of questioning. I appreciate you being here today. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ranking Member Torres for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Russo, one of the 2 reports that your office has publicly released is a 2022 review of the department's dispatch and call-taking process. One of the recommendations from that report is that the department should convert dispatcher roles from sworn officers to civilian. Changing those roles will, release some officers to handle the field operations, where they are short of personnel. And it will also ensure that we have specifically 911 trained dispatchers to handle those 911 calls that come into the center and the traffic from the officer's request. Can you tell us where that recommendation is?
I believe it's closed. We had discussions with the department about the challenges to hire civilian staff in the D.C. area, frankly. They, I think, have 28 dispatchers. I think 20 of them are sworn. We would definitely like to see that move more towards the civilian end of things. But
So we have received conflicting information about this specific issue. Can you respond back to the committee as to, are there sworn officers there? Has this department been converted to a civilian department? If not, why not? Can you just get back to us on that?
Absolutely.
Because again, we want information that is accurate. I would also, Mr. Chairman, with you, want to request that you send us a list of those recommendations that were closed based on the spirit of the recommendation or spirit of the
Sure.
law. We want to make sure that what you have recommended is taken seriously. On another issue, I want to ask you about member security. As you know, our security issues have more than quadrupled over the last few years. Capitol Police cannot be present in every single congressional district, and certainly not while we are, working during district work periods. Has your office examined the department partnerships with our state and local law enforcement? Are there MOUs that have been signed, and is there a process that has been created to write up those MOUs?
Yes, ma'am. We haven't looked specifically at the process on the MOUs. In other words, how does the chief determine the best sheriff's office or city police department to coordinate with, or both in some cases? We are aware of the MOUs. We actually are releasing or have released a report that talks about field office reviews that we just did in San Francisco and Tampa. And that, you know, in that review, we talked about the networking they're doing with local law enforcement, intelligence community, and things of that nature. And many of these also come from our flash reports. These recommendations are reoccurring themes, whether it's enhancing your outreach, your connections, contacts, and the dissemination of the intelligence. So, you know, we're doing more work in that area to be able to evaluate the effectiveness. But you're right on as far as having to network with the local law enforcement in each of your districts is imperative.
It's Tampa. It's easier to get to Tampa from the Inland Empire than it is to get to San Francisco, for example, in my district. So I want to see a process, a real process on how we reach out to, you know, local jurisdictions. For example, my home city is about 25% under deployment every single day. They don't have the officers that are readily available to respond to any incidents, you know, at my home. My district office is just the opposite. You know, it is located in an area where they are fully deployed, very, very quick responses to my staff when they have had to put the office on lockdown. So it is very important for me that when we are coordinating with local law enforcement or state jurisdictions, that we look at their deployment needs, and we look at it from, you know, a perspective, do they have the manpower to respond? If not, what do we need in order for them to help us? With that, Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Stahl, for purpose of questioning the witness.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to where I was just to make sure I fully understand where we're at in your comments. Are you aware of the language included in the fiscal year 2022 Appropriations Committee report that instructs the IG to make reports publicly available whenever practical and begin publishing reports on your website?
Yes, sir, I have a general understanding of the direction.
Do you believe that that gives you the authority, or do you believe that that language still requires you to obtain the consent of the Capitol Police Board? Just making sure I understand your view of the chain of command versus what I think is congressional intent, and figuring out where there might be a break in this so we can improve process.
Yes, sir. The way the process is set up includes those other bodies that I had mentioned. Certainly want to engage the department to help review the material to make sure we're not missing something or putting
Understood.
something out. So from that standpoint, I feel comfortable with the collaborative effort that we put together as long as we're all moving forward and getting these reports out.
But you feel, I mean, historically that hasn't been the case, right? If only 2 have been made public out of
Correct.
a very large volume of total reports
Sure.
that have been done. Is that a fair
That's,
assessment of the situation?
yes, sir.
But you think that that's changing, but we just haven't seen it make it all the way through the pipeline. Is that kind of how is that a fair
Yeah,
characterization of how you're presenting this?
Yes, sir. I think the approach was after the 22 guidance or directive from Congress, the process was finalized. It had started before I got here, but
Understood.
we finalized it when I got here. Got those 2 out. I think there's 6, 7 or so that are in the review period. My hope is that we're going to start seeing a steady stream of our reports coming out.
We'll definitely be looking forward to that. I think
Yes.
that's an important piece of the puzzle here. But the Capitol Police Board, although you described the pipeline a bit, the Capitol Police Board doesn't have the ability to then prevent you from complying with those specific instructions from Congress. Is that true, or do you disagree with that? I mean, there's a process, right? They're invested in this, but ultimately that authority resides with you, no?
So they put out a directive years ago that we don't release anything.
Correct.
The current process, as I understand it, is the board, when they get to the final review, the third party in the review process, they then give They give authority for us to then release it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Not a carte blanche, everything's moving forward, it's on a case-by-case due to the sensitivity of the information contained. in it.
Understanding the sensitivity, but I mean, you're also privy to the sensitivity and could
Yep.
consult with the board, but ultimately, in your view, the board has the final say.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have thoughts and comments on that, but I understand your position. Appreciate you being here. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
There we go. The chairman of the full committee yields back, and this will be the final questions of the day. I kind of want to go back to where we were talking about the different recommendations and how they were closed. But before we do that, let me ask a couple other questions. Is CERT being the Containment Emergency Response Team? Do you know what bureau they are currently under? Are they under OSB or PSB?
So they're in the special operations. We requested, or we suggested in a recommendation that they get moved to the protective operations unit.
Okay, so they're still under Operations Services Bureau.
Yes, sir.
And I assume you're aware that the recommendation from the June 2021 flash report was that the U.S. Capitol Police IG, your predecessor, recommended that they be moved from Operations Service Bureau to the Protective Service Bureau. And per the QFRs from Chief Manger's hearing, you have marked this recommendation as complete as of April 18th, 2023. We have a copy, and I've seen the department's proposed reorganizational chart, and it still has that CERT remains under OSB. Now, this is, it's currently in OSB. It's proposed to remain in OSB, but yet that recommendation has been closed as if it was completed. So the concern that we have is that are the goalposts being moved to make it easier for the department to appear to be completing recommendations than actually ensuring that it's being held at a higher standard? Are we just seeing maybe easing up the recommendations just to be able to close them out? I mean,
No, I don't think so. I think, in the case of the CERT team, one of the big fundamental issues was communication. When protective operations needed CERT present, or dignitary protection, they would show up, 12 strong. The only way they were rolling, I don't want to get into numbers, but they would roll in a full team fashion. Because they reported to the Special Operations Bureau, protective ops didn't get a lot of their requests fulfilled. So it became an ongoing issue. So I come from the standpoint that communication issues in an organization need to be dealt with through the chain of command as opposed to just arbitrarily grabbing the whole unit and moving it to save yourself some communication issues. Now, in my conversations with the department, they are moving towards more of a response fashion, counter-assault fashion for the protective ops. They're actually, I don't want to get into it here, but some of the things they're doing to support protective operations, they still have that responsibility of the campus, campus. So we want to make sure we don't take away their effectiveness on the campus as well. So I think we hit a middle ground. I don't think we moved the goalpost. We got a really good middle ground to build upon.
so short answer being you didn't fully agree with the recommendation from Mr. Bolton.
That's fair.
So it kind of takes me back to our previous question. If that recommendation is marked as complete but modified, how do we know that when we look at it as a committee, and we're looking at, okay, they've completed this, and then we find out that it wasn't completed. So it really only matters if they're implemented the way that was recommended if you're going to close that recommendation. Otherwise, the recommendation has to be modified, otherwise we're undermining the spirit of the recommendation, really, if you want to use that term. So that's one of the things that I think we need to work on to improve communication between your office and the committee and the public is, what is really being done. So we may have to go back and review all the recommendations as Ms. Torres requested. Would appreciate a list of those recommendations that were completed less than 100% than the way that the recommendation was made, if that's a fair way of putting it.
That's
So-
exactly right, and we have that, we track
Okay.
that information, be happy to provide it.
So, since the inception of the U.S. Capitol Police OIG in 2007, the OIG has made, on an average, 36 recommendations per fiscal year. Of course, in 2021, there was 104, so that's kind of an exception there. With only 2 months left in 2023, your tenure has yielded only 2 recommendations. Look, I'm not one that we should just be making recommendations for making recommendations, and I don't think that we do that just for the sake of, hey, we're outputting product here. But it does bring to question why such a disparity when, on average, there were 36 recommendations per year, and now we've only had 2.
So I want meaningful recommendations. We just did 103 just for J4. Makes you wonder what are the other areas this office looked at all these years before. We've touched on everything, as we said, training, recruitment, the equipment, communication. We touched almost every facet of the agency. We actually have quite a few reports in progress right now. Some are coming out with some recommendations, so I think that number is going to increase a significant amount here in the short term. But no, we've got a lot of projects going on, and I think we're, of course, risk-based, so we're looking at the highest priority areas.
Well, I appreciate that. Just for correction, you said J4. I think you meant J6.
I'm sorry, J6.
Yeah, just
My
want to make sure for the
apologies.
record that
My apologies.
that was correct. So, and as I said, we're not looking for just doing busy work to do busy work, right? And we want to make sure that what we do is good and proper. Who on your team is involved in determining if a recommendation has been completed?
Well, ultimately, it'd be my responsibility, but I do that in coordination with my team.
Okay.
My number
So
2.
there's not really a process other than just everyone agreeing that, yeah, this is making a recommendation to you and you.
Well, it's not haphazard. We actually evaluate all the aspects or elements of the recommendation, the risk associated with it. We determine back and forth with the department audit coordinator any materials that we need, and then we'll sit around and determine if that risk has been neutralized or, are they putting in place a compensating control that will achieve that.
General idea, how many are on this team?
How many are on?
That you work with about closing, how many people, just a ballpark figure?
Oh, on the team?
Yes.
Well, my audit director and could be the auditor that did it, so maybe just 2,
Okay.
maybe 3.
So-
Maybe our coordinator in the office as well.
Per se, you're going to look at closing out a recommendation. Is it always unanimous, or do you occasionally have dissenters?
Well, I open it up. Everybody has outstanding backgrounds in audit, and blessed to have a very professional team, experienced team. So I take into account the guidance they provide. So I think we have 7 where we, as we say, spirit of, but some of them they're performing a function, an intelligence fusion center function. They were just waiting for furniture. The function was being done, they were waiting for final build-out. So as long as they're able to furnish information that they're actually performing the function, I'm not overly concerned about what room number they sit in to do it.
Right.
So that's an example of one of the 7.
So there may be times that one of the team members dissents, but you still feel that has enough been done. I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, just trying to get an understanding.
No,
It's not always unanimous.
I don't know. I can't remember a time where we had any serious difference in concluding that the controls were adequate. I mean, could it happen? Sure.
Okay. I mean, it's
perhaps
not
with the CERT team issue.
Yeah.
But having 33 years of law enforcement, having dealt with counter assault and CERT and all that, I had a pretty good feeling that the homogenized version that they were putting in place was sufficient for what they were trying to get at.
Just
So-
trying to get an idea
Yes, sir.
because, you're talking to a body who normally never has anything we have unanimity on. So, but just trying to get an idea. So the moment's come. Last question. Do you, and we've talked about this in private. We see that the makeup of your office and the process is out of the norm of what you would see in most inspector generals, is that you report to the very people that have the power to terminate you, right? That's a conflict of interest in our mind and within a lot of inspector generals. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot because I understand the situation. And you may not be able to answer this, and that's fine, but let me put it this way. Do you feel that there are times, not necessarily in yours, but when an inspector general, and being hypothetical, but we all know what I'm talking about, if an inspector general is responsible for investigating the very entity that has the power to hire and fire, does that not create some level of conflict?
So it's an ongoing challenge. In Florida, I had 3 IG posts. 2 of them were secretaries of an agency appointed by a governor. 1 was an elected official. In all 3 of those occasions, I was reporting to one person who paid my check, who provided me administrative HR support, training, et cetera. That was a lot less independent than how I feel it is now, where I now report to 3 people who have to unanimously decide to hire or fire, rather than just one person. So it's an ongoing challenge in the IG community to achieve that, utopia, but I think it's a pretty good, from where I'm sitting, my relationship with the board is a better, stronger, more independent relationship than if I were to have just reported to one individual.
Okay, I appreciate that, and it may be better, but I don't think it's best. And so we'll be working. We appreciate the work that you're doing. We appreciate you being here, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. Before we adjourn, I also want to mention the good work that was done by Ms. Torres and the minority side relating to the psychological evaluation that was recently revealed, and we really appreciate work that you will put into investigating that as well. Again, I'd like to thank you for being here and for joining us today. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you, and we ask that you please respond to those questions in writing. Without objection, each member will have 5 legislative days to insert additional material into the record or to revise and extend their remarks. If there's no further business, I thank the members for their participation. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.